Hi, everyone. So today we are going to be talking about Saturn in Virgo within a birth chart. So Saturn in Virgo speaks a language that few people hear, but everyone feels. It's the voice of reason. It's measured, deliberate, precise, and often unflinching. So from a young age, these individuals, they seem to understand the weight of responsibility in ways that can be a little bit wise beyond their years. While their peers may still play or drift, they're already, noticing what needs to be done, what needs to be organized, what will cause trouble if it's ignored. So they often begin working very young, not always out of necessity, but because their mind and their hands, they they demand utility, they demand structure and purpose. So, chores, studies, part time jobs, small tasks, these are not burdens for these people. They are training grounds. The world is a system of cause and effect. And Saturn in Virgo learns early that their actions actually matter and that effort compounds. That skill and precision, they can produce real outcomes for them. So, work is not optional for Saturn and Virgo. Instead, it is a matter of integrity. They develop a strong work ethic so early that it almost feels intrinsic, like, rhythm embedded into the body. So they are the ones that are quietly, fixing what is broken long before anyone else even notices. They notice the inefficiencies in the school system or at home or at their job, and they're figuring out solutions without being asked. There's a real discipline in them that almost is quite, impressive. Some of it comes from necessity, some of it from, internalized standards, and some from like a subtle, almost instinctive understanding of how life demands us to always do better. So these individuals, they learn early that effort is really currency and that responsibility is freedom. So the voice of reason that Saturn in Virgo carries is really rooted in experience and observation. It's not theoretical. It doesn't principle alone. Argues from the evidence of a lived life. So their advice is often practical or measured. It's surprisingly unsentimental at times, even, yet it comes from a place of care. And so when they speak, it's usually after a lot of careful thought, weighing the options, considering the ripple effects of their words. It is not the voice of someone trying to impress or to dominate. It is the voice of someone who knows what works, what fails, and how to navigate the middle path between chaos and control. People may initially resist it or even dismiss it or fail to notice it, but over time it earns respect. It carries the weight of truth and it's built on consistent observation, action, and integrity. Now, karmically, Saturn in Virgo is tasked with learning responsibility, discipline, and the value of precise effort. So early lessons often they revolve around health or work or service. Perhaps they have had to take on more than they expected in childhood. Perhaps they have faced the consequences of carelessness, either their own or others, and these experiences, they teach them the cost of inattention and the payoff of conscientious action. So over time, the lesson becomes clear. Life does not reward shortcuts, but it does reward more meticulous type of work, careful thought, uh, steady follow through. So there's often this like internal balance to learn discipline, but discipline without being rigid, diligence without self criticism, service without self erasure. So the Saturn return for these individuals is intense in its clarity rather than it is, spectacle. It is a period where inefficiencies are really exposed and habits are tested. Old routines that work temporarily are revealed as unsustainable. They must evaluate every aspect of life, daily structure, their work processes, their health habits can be a big one, their commitments. And change comes not from impulse, but from deliberate action. They rebuild with an almost uncanny surgical precision. They can really eliminate what is unnecessary and they can reinforce what is actually essential. So, this is not drama. It's more like, a quiet transformation, a reshaping of life so that it runs on integrity and practical wisdom. So the result is often impressive, even if it's understated. A life that runs efficiently and purposefully and you know, um, with the vision that only someone very critical can really kind of create, right? So, work is really where Saturn in Virgo thrives. Their gifts are really suited to any endeavor that's really requiring attention and organization or exacting standards. They excel in things like healthcare or teaching, acting, researching, administration, editing, quality control, any field where observation, analysis, and steady effort produce really tangible results. Recognition is not their primary motivation, like a Saturn in Leo. It's actually kind of the work itself, the satisfaction of knowing that they've done what needed to be done and that, the systems function because of their efforts and that their contributions are meaningful, even when they might be, like, for example, invisible to others. So, through this work, they really demonstrate a lot of mastery, reliability, and an unwavering commitment to practical excellence. The voice of Saturn in Virgo is completely inseparable from its work ethic. The two are reflections of the same principle, you know, reason that's grounded in experience and insight that is delivered with precision. They give guidance, but it's backed by action. Their words are clear, because their minds are clear. So their advice, it carries weight because it's informed by, constant observation and discipline effort. They know what they're talking about. So people might not always follow immediately, but the message, it lingers, shaping choices very quietly and profoundly for others. So they're not flashy or performative, but their influence is lasting and it's very carried in the resonance of reliability and intelligence and integrity. So Saturn in Virgo teaches the power of reason applied to the real world. It reminds us that diligence, precision, and service are all forms of mastery. That, work begun early and attended to carefully and carried out with integrity, it produces a real foundation that can weather chaos. It is that voice of reason that's like not always loud, but it's unforgettable. And it's etched into the lives of those who hear it. So the lesson of Saturn in Virgo is both, simple, but also very deep. Precision is power, and true authority comes from the quiet, consistent application of skill, care, and judgment. So, to live with Saturn in Virgo is really to live in alignment with reality itself, to see the patterns, to do the work, and to speak with the unmistakable clarity of someone who knows how the world turns and how to navigate it with care. So, in astrology, the Saturn return, it happens when Saturn comes back to the exact zodiacal degree that it occupied the moment of someone's birth. So this typically unfolds in one's late 20s, around the ages of 27 to 30, and it really signals a rite of passage into full adulthood and the lessons of Saturn, responsibility and seriousness, getting real about who you are and getting delivered your karma. So the Saturn return, it confronts people with reality and it tasks people with accountability, and it really asks what matters most. So for someone with Saturn in Virgo, this transit is not, a flashy reinvention. It's more about clarity and discipline and restructuring your life so that it finally runs with efficiency and integrity. So there's this need to organize what has been chaotic, to perfect what has been imprecise, and to take ownership over one's habits or work, health, even, or commitments. So Saturn in Virgo doesn't just demand growth, it demands youthful or very useful growth, right? The kind that really sticks, the framework, the architecture of like a bridge that finally holds weight. So, there is this meticulous reorganization of life that happens around the Saturn return. They might find themselves, rewriting their routines or refining or abandoning projects that don't hold water, and building systems that really reflect who they really are, not who they are told they should be. So, themes commonly include things like, work identity kind of solidifying, no more drifting, no more second guessing. Vocation becomes like really practical and meaningful, sustainable, and the labor that we've put into our career, it starts to pay off. But it also asks for, more depth of commitment. Your habits can come under scrutiny, at this time. You can't escape this anymore. Sleep, health, diet, daily habits, they become domains of serious attention. Relationships can also be tested. Saturn will ask, does this align with my long term life? And if not, change or restructure, yeah, it tends to follow suit. Authenticity also becomes non negotiable, oftentimes during the Saturn return. We are asked to take authority over ourselves. And so superficiality, it falls away. So if someone has been cutting corners or, people pleasing, the Saturn return kind of forces a reckoning. So Saturn in Virgo will make, a really kind of interesting Saturn return. There's that, organizing the mundane of our daily life, bringing our life to a full blueprint of the habits that kind of set us up to succeed. And if we've been working hard, we will do our success around this time. So somebody who has Saturn in Virgo is Jessica Simpson, the singer and clothing designer. And, in her chart, Saturn sits in Virgo, and she is a Scorpio rising. So let's look back and see what was going on during her Saturn return. Jessica's life has been marked by a lot of seismic restructuring throughout her life. She became very famous very young. So she'd become this like famous, successful pop star as a teenager and, of course, as a young adult. But the early 2010s, that's when she would have been experiencing her Saturn return. It really found her redefining her professional identity and her personal commitments. She really grew her fashion brand into a major business and moved into more entrepreneurial work, beyond performing. And she made, life decisions in relationships and family life that follows suit. There was a maturity happening there. It wasn't just Jessica Simpson, the pop star. It was Jessica Simpson, the business owner, right? And she was fighting a lot to be taken seriously in the business world. Another person who has their Saturn in Virgo is Kristen Bell. And so, Kristen's career had already, started to take very serious shape in the early 2000s. But by the 2010s, when she started going through her Saturn return, she was actually landing more substantial roles and finding the work that would come to define her public life and her craft. So she entered this period of evolving from an aspiring actor into this like reliable, bankable, creative force with, more nuanced roles, award recognition, and an expanded professional identity. So the Saturn return really asked her, are you ready to own your work? Are you ready to really use your voice out in the world? Um, or, for someone with Saturn and Virgo, the return can act like this recalibration. It can pull someone away from like wishful thinking or diffuse ambition, and actually demand precise action towards the career and measurable results and disciplined follow through. So the Saturn return for Saturn in Virgo tends to be a little bit more on the serious tide. Um, it's not necessarily something where, we're going to be dealing with the where Saturn in Leo wants us to perform, Saturn in Virgo wants us to work. This is, a life that's shaped by refinement and an almost devotional relationship to improvement. So there's this lesson that competence equals safety. So, psychologically, Saturn in Virgo, they can tend to have a little bit more anxiety, but it's usually around imperfection. So there's this fear of making mistakes or overlooking the details or failing to meet an internal standard that keeps shifting upward. So many with this placement, they feel like they have to like kind of earn their place in the world through effort or precision, self-sacrifice. And so we can deal with more, workaholism, more somatic stress or a tendency to internalize guilt, especially when rest or pleasure feels undeserved. So at its most challenging, this placement can really trap someone in kind of a loop of self-monitoring and self-correction that never quite lets them feel finished. But in its matured expression, Saturn in Virgo is the master, wordsmith. They're people who can take chaos and they can make it really functional. They know how to speak to people. They know how to edit. They know how to research. They make great stewards of the land. Because they're not afraid of putting their hands in the dirt and doing the work. So there's also, I just want to say, a very strong mind body component to this placement. Stress often shows up physically, and healing becomes this like lifelong curriculum for them. So, Saturn and Virgo natives, they're often here to learn really sustainable routines rather than rigid ones. So, when they stop treating their bodies like machines that have to like perform perfectly, or and they actually like when they can move from that and start treating them like, living systems that need maintenance and compassion, then this placement becomes very deeply wise at that point. So we're moving out of that rigidness, and we're learning to still have rules, still have boundaries, still have habits, but we want habits that we're going to commit to long to term. We're not going to like resent them after day 3, right? So Saturn in Virgo really asks for, you know, um, us to think about improvement, not so much as getting to the point of being perfect, but just improvement as an act of love. Um, so with time, this placement, it really can produce people who are like very quietly competent, very deeply ethical, and capable of offering, really grounded, practical healing to others because they have learned how to live inside their own limits without shame. So this is a beautiful placement to have in a chart. We can kind of come off sometime as, the fixer, the helper. Um, we can kind of, we can be, again, that voice of reason for others. Um, but, you know, we are learning with this placement how to, lead by example, how we care for ourselves. Other people are going to see that and they're going to respond to that. So we got to learn to take care of ourselves first and foremost. We can't be doing for everyone else before we get our own cup filled, right? So with this placement, there is a tendency to kind of do that, to help other people, to be that fixer. We got to put the attention back on ourselves first. So there's is this lesson with this the sacredness of our limits is definitely kind of a theme here. So, Saturn and Virgo, a real steward of integrity. These people, often become the ones that others trust in moments of crisis because they can stay grounded and they can stay focused on what actually helps. So, they understand that service is not like about martyrdom, but it's actually about sustainability. So, their wisdom, it's quiet, it's earned, but it has to be deeply embodied.